to the Global News Review for 24 February. I'm Patrick Ryan, President of the Tennessee World Affairs Council. Thanks for being with us today. I'm joined by Ambassador Dick Bowers and Dr. Breck Walker, our usual Global News Review team. And today we have a special guest, Ambassador John Kornblum, who will be with us shortly. Gentlemen, good to see you. I hope everyone's over ice and snowmageddon here in Nashville, as John was pointing out earlier. Not much more than a dusting for people who come from further north, but for Nashville it was quite a day. So welcome, Ambassador John Kornblum, to the Global News Review. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
Let me introduce the ambassador. Ambassador John Kornblum has a long record of service in the United States and Europe, both as a diplomat and as a businessman. He's recognized as an eminent expert on U.S.-European political and economic relations, in particular in Central and Eastern Europe. He served as the U.S. ambassador to Germany from 1997 to 2001. Before that, he occupied a number of high-level diplomatic posts, including U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Special Envoy for the Dayton Peace Process, U.S. Ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the Helsinki Process, Deputy U.S. Ambassador to NATO, and U.S. Minister and Deputy Commandant of Forces in Divided Berlin. Again, Ambassador, welcome, and we're looking forward to having a conversation today on the transatlantic issues.
Thank
Dick
you.
and Breck, good to see you here with us today.
Good to see you. The snow is gone. I have no snow in my front yard anymore, but it took till today to get rid of it all.
All right.
I know,
and
John,
Breck?
it's not a heck of a lot that we get, but it was enough. And Kay took a tumble on black ice, and so she's nursing a bum to bum.
Okay, and Breck, we can't see the palm trees in the background, so we don't know if you're in Florida still or.
I'm still in Florida, and the sun's so bright I had to close the curtains.
Okay. Well, we have a nice sunny day here, and we're looking forward to springtime, but I'm not sure we're out of the woods yet. Before we get going, let me remind everyone that this week we have a special town hall tomorrow night. Thursday, the 25th of February, and at 5:30 p.m., we'll be hosting Kelsey Davenport. She is the Director of Non-Proliferation at the Arms Control Association, and we'll be talking about the Iranian nuclear deal and the Biden administration, and how the clock is ticking on reaching an agreement for the United States to return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. Just an aside, I watched Ms. Davenport's appearance last night. She was with the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, and it was a terrific accounting of developments in U.S.-Iran relations relative to the nuclear deal. So you won't want to miss the conversation she'll have here at the Tennessee World Affairs Council Thursday night, 5:30, and you can register on our website, tnwac.org. Also, Kelsey Davenport and I co-authored an op-ed on the Iran nuclear deal and the Biden administration's obstacles to getting a deal done, and that appeared in the Tennessean on Sunday. And there's a copy of that posted on our website, tnwac.org, so you can read that and be prepared with your good questions tomorrow night at our special town hall on the Iranian nuclear deal. Let me remind you that we would like to hear your questions here today at the Global News Review as we go through the topics. Feel free to add your questions to the question tab at the bottom of your screen, or save them to the end, but we do like to hear from you. Okay, Dick, over to you, and we will start out with our topics du jour. Dick, if you
Gotta unmute.
are you on mute there,
Hello
Ambassador?
there. So glad to see you. Glad to join you. We're topic number one is Biden and the Transatlantic Alliance. Topic number two is social media and global regulations. And then topic three, We're going to be reflecting on Desert Storm at 30. So it's 30 years ago today that the main U.S. ground assault took place to go into Iraq.
Okay. Breck, coming to you. Are you on mute?
No, I don't think so. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you. Go ahead.
The question of the day is this. Australia is in a battle with this social media outlet after Canberra moved forward with legislation to require payments to news sources for use of their content. The provider responded with a news blackout and user restrictions, angering many Aussies. And the possible answers are A, Google, B, TikTok, C, Facebook, and D, Instagram. And Pat, I wanted to ask how many of our panelists have been on TikTok before?
Well, you know, I was just about to say, you gave us a sterling recitation of TikTok, and you left us with the image of a TikTok, your favorite TikTok video. Was it some sort of mammal doing some trick or something? What was that?
I believe it was a hippopotamus eating a full watermelon in one bite. That was a great video. I recommend it to everybody.
Okay, well, I neglected to follow up and look that up, but I'll get it on my list now. But no, I haven't been on TikTok. I'm aware of it. And, I think with that, we'll move on. Our first topic today, we are going to have a deep dive into the Transatlantic Alliance. We've mentioned it in the news review, some of the foreign policy objectives of the administration going forward. And today we are very pleased to have with us Ambassador John Kornblum, who he is the go-to guy to tell us what is happening in the alliance, what the Europeans' reactions are, and what we should look forward to in terms of the Biden administration's claim to be back into multilateralism and America's back. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Patrick. Hello to everybody. I have spent some time in Europe. In fact, I've been living there except for now, of course, where I'm happily in Nashville because of the quarantine. I've been living in Europe uninterruptedly since 1997. So that's 24 years. And before that, I was there a long time also. So I have a lot of background and lots of things to think about with Europe. But I think the basic point that I would like to start with today, especially for your listeners, is important, is that whatever President Biden said, whatever he was followed by the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France in his speeches at the Munich conference, it's important for us to remember that even though China is a big thing on our screens right now, even though we have lots of challenges in places like Afghanistan, and even though Russia is peppering us with some kind of cyber bots or whatever they are, the very core of American foreign policy since the beginning of the Republic has been Europe. We are, after all, a European society. And we, through the entire 19th century, we essentially had no foreign policy because it was taken care of for us by the British. Even today, some people don't like to admit this, that the British who had fought a war, and who were the last ones, by the way, to enter the United States Capitol, and they trashed it in 1812. That the fact is that after that, the British had such an interest in keeping other European countries out of the New World that they sponsored for us something called the Monroe Doctrine, which we think is a brilliant American diplomatic move. But what it really was a brilliant move to get the British to provide our security for us. So we have a lot of experience with being dependent on Europe. After 1945, it turned around and they were dependent on us. And from that point onward, we've had a back and forth about what America is doing, what the Europeans should be doing, how much America is contributing, how the Europeans should be contributing. Much of the debates which are going on today were the same ones that we had in the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s. The difference is, however, that the Cold War is over, that American society is changing very rapidly. Not only time is passing, but it's becoming a less European-based society. And that the Europeans haven't kept up. We have to be honest about this. They haven't kept up. They're not keeping up economically, militarily, and strategically. They play almost no role in the world. What they have been good at is maintaining a very strong manufacturing economy. And they sell lots of manufactured goods to China, to Russia, to South Asia, to Africa, to South America. And in particular, the Germans, who are the most important country in Europe, sell more than anybody else. And so European behavior is almost by definition more conciliatory, more focused on keeping pragmatic ties open, less idealistic. European behavior is always also based on the feeling that Europe has still to recover from the horrible 20th century that they had, whereas the 20th century was actually quite good for the United States. So we start with a different point of view right there. And finally, we have the difference between maybe one of the reasons why a lot of our ancestors came to America to begin with. Europe is a top-down society based on structures, based on bureaucracies, and based on stability. America is a very diverse society based on achievements, on earning money, and on finding new visions and new horizons to conquer. And so this was all brought home to me about 7 or 8 years ago when Barack Obama came to Berlin for his first big speech as president. And he spoke for an hour or so, and he listed 43 issues upon which the United States and Europe were going to cooperate. And not once did he mention the European Union or NATO. In other words, he saw Europe as a bilateral territory, but not as a peace project as they see themselves. This caused great consternation in Europe because it gave the impression that we were somehow abandoning our support for their efforts to overcome the 20th century. Obama rapidly said, no, he didn't mean that. He just wanted to show how much he valued their friendship and their support. But the fact is they don't want us to tell them how much they're going to support us. They want us to tell them how much we're going to support them in what they consider to be a historic development that they're still in the midst of. So that's the background to lots of the debates that we have. They're not necessarily dramatic, and they're not necessarily even very important, because the fact is we get along and do things together on very many things, including Desert Storm, which we're going to commemorate this week. But the world is changing. We're going to have another item today on regulation of the internet. New generations are coming. And so there has been a good deal of contention between America and Europe, actually long before Donald Trump ever appeared on the scene. He sort of put the cherry on top of the ice cream soda, if you will, by not only differing from the Europeans, but suggesting that they were our enemies and we were going to do them in. That didn't develop a whole lot of sympathy in Europe for that point of view. And the Europeans, I think, actually were quite mature in the way they handled it. They essentially said nothing for 4 years. And so we have to see Biden's participation there as partly a mea culpa, partly saying friends don't talk to each other that way. He was quite clear on that. But also, secondly, an effort to rebuild the European platform. Because however much we may like or dislike the French president or the British Queen or whatever, the fact is that the relationship with Europe provides the United States with an unbelievable strategic platform. Since the end of the Cold War and the expansion of NATO and the European Union, we have constructed together with the Europeans a democratic community which stretches from the Russian border on the Baltic or the Black Sea, wherever you want to see it, all the way to the Russian border between the United States and Russia in the Bering Straits. That is 2/3 of the northern hemisphere of the world. It's also a community of about 1 billion people. It's a community of very rich, highly educated, and strategic people who still produce some of the best industrial goods in the world. We also shouldn't forget that the Pfizer vaccine, marketed here by a company based on German immigration to the United States, was actually developed by a company in Mainz, Germany, Inotech, I think it's called. And so this vaccine is actually a German product, but to make it even more interesting, the people who developed it were German citizens, and I think born in Germany, but they were of Turkish origin. So they demonstrated the fact that Europe is also very rapidly becoming a country of countries of immigrants. Germany has exactly the same percentage of foreign born as the United States does. And the United Kingdom has a much higher percentage of foreign born than the United States does, partially because of their colonial legacy. So our societies are very closely matched in many ways, except for the fact that they started and lost World War II and we won World War II. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic about that. That is the underlying problem that we have. Their sense of confidence, their sense of strategy, of strategic importance was totally destroyed in the first 50 years of the 20th century, and it has never come back. Our sense of self-confidence grew, and for about 45 years, because the Russians occupied much of Europe, we in fact managed an alliance in Europe. But since 1990, when the Cold War ended, we have become less interested in alliance tasks and less adept at doing them, to tell you the truth, because we think we should all now just be, we Americans and Europeans should now all just be good Western people who are doing the same thing together. And we have tended, and I say we, I don't mean people like us here, but I mean the highest levels of US government or the highest levels of US academia have tended to forget that the Europeans don't see themselves the way we see them ourselves. They see themselves as damaged goods, and damaged goods which still need to have an awful lot of recovering to do. So this leads to misunderstandings continuously. I won't even begin to go into them. We just misunderstand each other off again and again and again. Add to that the built-in still rejection rivalry of two continents, one of which was born of the culture of the other. They still consider us to be upstarts, and we still consider them to be old-fashioned, broken down imperialists. And so there's an awful lot of this kind of stuff that goes on. I can tell you from my experience, I dealt for 35 years, I did more or less nothing but multilateral cooperation with the Europeans. The sarcasm gets quite heavy sometimes when you're dealing with Europeans, because they still are sort of, it's sort of like somebody once mentioned it to me, it's like being the second son in the family. You know, your mother, and I was the first, it's like being the first son. I mean, I was the first son. Your mother comes to you and says, you know what? We love you so much, we've got another one. And you say, what do you mean? We got one already, you don't need another one. And there's a little bit of that in the European view to us. What do you mean new world? We were already the world. We didn't need a new world. So anyway, not too big a point of it, but this part of it is also very important. And so when Joe Biden was there, first sort of apologizing because we had a man whose manners weren't the most polished, so we say, as president. But secondly, because there are lots and lots of things. And Biden, I know Biden, if I may say so, if I may drop names here, I know him personally quite well from years and years and years of working with him. He believes in the theory, the reality of the fact that the United States can't really succeed globally if we don't have our European partners. He is committed to this. If you read his speech, which I just did before we started here today, again, he is committed to making things work, but it's not going to be so easy. Just saying we're back is not going to be enough because there are major issues, some of them quite easy to deal with maybe, but others, such as the one which is going to be our, I think, second agenda point, in the internet regulation, cyberspace, cyber warfare, the effect of social networks. In other words, the entire big bag of issues which are tied to the new digital world. We are far from having any kind of, not only not having a consensus, but I think maybe Breck will talk about this. We don't even have a sense of where we want to go. And you look at the various regulatory ideas being put forward. Even Facebook is now running big ads in the newspaper saying, we want to be regulated, please regulate us, please. But they themselves don't know what that means. If most regulators would say, okay, Facebook, we're gonna sue you every time you put something bad on Facebook, and that's not gonna work either. So in other words, the opportunities for difficulties and disagreement are great. And the chances for success in many of these issues are not very great. And Joe Biden understands this. I'm sure he did. If you read his speech, it's peppered with, we need to do this. We need to be on this basis. We need to see that we are something important together. It's sort of preparing himself, his administration, and the Europeans for a very long and dragged out debate. And that's what we're going to have. But I think it's important not to overestimate the heat of such a debate, because we've always had very heated debates with the Europeans. And it's also, however, not possible to predict success in the debate, because there are things that are so difficult to deal with. Corona has been a prelude to probably a couple of decades of pretty deep confusion about what's going on, and pretty deep fears about what the implications of all of these new digital tools. We haven't even mentioned the two sort of elephants in the China shop, that is artificial intelligence and quantum computing, which, if they really take hold the way people expect them to, will turn our world totally on end. So Biden is doing something very important in repairing relations and hopefully finding a basis for a very good cooperation with them. But we shouldn't assume that everything is going to be perfect because he says we're back. In fact, a lot of the Europeans were saying, what do you mean you're back? We've been here the whole time and you forgot us. So it's up to us, it's up to you to win us back, not just to tell us that you're back. So there's a certain amount of sarcasm in Europe also these days about the Americans say, we're going to come back and tell you what to do again. They're not really willing to listen to that. I'll stop there.
Terrific, Ambassador. Thank you for that. That's a good kickoff to our program today. And go ahead, Breck.
I was going to say, I have a question, if you don't mind. Of course, 8 years ago, we had a presidential election. I think most folks thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and of course, Trump won. And this past election, everyone thought Biden, or most folks thought Biden was going to win handily, and it was very close. And it's not too difficult a prospect to think that Trump could compete very vigorously next time around. How does that affect Europeans in their dealings with Biden? Because again, it's sort of whiplash from one administration to another.
Well, yeah, that's exactly that point you hear fairly often. We're happy to have him here, but it's not just Trump. It was also George W. Bush, who was not exactly a big favorite. The fact is, however, that the Europeans don't have anywhere else to go. And maybe I should make this point. There's no option for Europe but to be as close as the United States. They are part of the American system. And I co-authored an article with Richard Holbrooke about 20 years ago in which we said, the first thing we should realize now is that America has become a European power. Europe could not exist the way it exists without the close relations with us. So, and they know this, but at the same time, they're after all our societies, which are much older than we are and which controlled the world for 500 years. They don't feel that they need to bow to us every time, and I think they're right about that. But they are worried about the inconsistency of if you go back over presidents, well, we can even go back to John F. Kennedy. I won't go through the whole list, but just think of the ups and downs that our own country, but also our allies, had to deal with the various presidents who came along between John F. Kennedy and Joe Biden. Again, just mention Vietnam for example. And so, yeah, you're right, Breck. They are happy but skeptical.
Ambassador, could I ask, it seems that in the run up to Biden taking office, everyone was saying the Europeans are delighted and they couldn't be happier. But in the past couple of weeks, I've seen a lot of stories about how Europe is really taking a practical look at what the relationship means. And for example, U.S. policy regarding China may not be the same cup of tea that the Germans are interested in. They're heavily invested with China, Volkswagen, et cetera. So there may be a lot of areas where we still have speed bumps in restoring the relationship, even though there was this happy, glad, kiss, kiss, hug, hug at the beginning.
Well, yeah, but that's always been the case. My point is that's always been the case. John F. Kennedy and Konrad Adenauer hated each other so much they would barely talk to each other. Helmut Schmidt and Jimmy Carter didn't talk to each other. Gerhard Schroeder and George W.
Were those
Bush,
personality issues or were those policy issues?
mostly personality, but some part. I mean, but part in these, when you get up at that exalted level, the difference between policy and personality is hard to discern. On the other hand, Bill Clinton considered Helmut Kohl to be almost his father that he never had. I can tell you, I'll tell you one small secret, which is also 20 years old. I used to be the interpreter for their private discussions, and I was told, you weren't there and you didn't take any notes, right? And I said, right, I didn't take any notes. But I was there and I interpreted back and forth for them. I did that 6 or 7 times. And it had nothing to do with foreign policy. It was just being friends.
Sure.
And so, personality always plays a role.
But now in the case of the Europeans and the United States, we have many more, not personality issues, but sincere policy disagreements, especially in terms with how we deal with China.
Yeah, and this is partially a trap that the Germans are in, because they have really, well, since the early 60s, I would say, or maybe even the 50s, they profited for all the destruction and death and horrible aspects of World War II. They profited considerably from the fact that after the war, they were able, much of it with American money, to rebuild their industry with very modern facilities. And this gave them a tremendous head start, and they became, the world's exporter. And that fact, being the world's exporter, has caused them tremendous friction with their European partners, tremendous friction with the United States, and again, not just with Donald Trump. He did attack them quite strongly for that, but I can tell you Barack Obama and his various secretaries of the Treasury were tearing their hair out after a while when they would try to talk to the Germans about trying to lower their trade surplus, raise their wage levels so that they wouldn't be so competitive with other countries. This is also the case within Europe, by the way. The Mediterranean countries, one of the issues which is waiting to explode in our face is the economic collapse of the Mediterranean countries in Europe, which is going forward without any interruption. And you talk to them and they'll say, well, our people want to have some better wages. The Germans haven't had a real wage increase in 15 years, which, by the way, is true. And they're being unfair by the fact that their people are willing to exert such wage discipline that their prices don't go up. Yeah, they're right about that. Is it unfair? The Germans would say, well, of course, they want us to finance their a sloppy, lazy life. And I've heard those words exactly put that way. So there are lots of problems within Europe, but the fact is that now, 75 years after World War II, Germany has emerged as the major country in Europe. And I personally say, maybe I'm prejudiced since I've lived there a long time, but it's probably the third most important country in the world right now. And it has on the one hand, it tries to be a very good partner to Europeans and Americans on things that they think we care about, but on things that we think they don't care about, like their internal economic system, they're not good partners at all. And this is not so much a problem with us because we're so big that we can take care of ourselves. But lots of the other Europeans are really quite angry at Germany for this. And if we can jump, maybe you wanted to ask about it anyway, the Nord Stream pipeline, which is a very big issue between us. Fact is that
a good segue there. We just got a question from Austin Travis. He wanted to know more about the Nord Stream 2 and what America might do if we thought that we needed to seek to end that deal.
Well, there's virtually nothing we can do. And in the end, we won't do anything and it'll be built. But the reason that the president, including President Biden, one of the reasons that he's so firm about it is the fact that the US Senate voted 99-0 to condemn it. Now, I'm not being, I hope, too sarcastic in suggesting that not too many US senators know what the Nord Stream pipeline is. But there are lots and lots and lots of senators with Polish, Czech, Slovakian, Romanian, Baltic constituencies. And the Eastern Europeans have been lobbying like mad, as have the Ukrainians, who would be the ones who would be hurt the most by the pipeline. And so they were able to convince 99 senators in a period where you hardly could get 99 senators to agree to have lunch break these days, that the Nord Stream pipeline was the devil's own work.
Right.
And what this does is this demonstrates that much of the things which the Europeans sometimes like to say are US-European disputes are really disputes between the big countries in Europe, which boil down now to France and Germany, but especially Germany, and other Europeans. And so we're there as the referee many times. That's a role that we don't like. Americans don't like to be. We don't even like to feel that we're responsible for a world order. We don't want to be the policeman of the world. So it puts us in a position we don't want to be in. And it makes it even worse because then the Europeans, and it's not just the Germans, the French and the Italians and others do this too. Whenever they have a big dispute among themselves, they say it's the Americans who are causing all the trouble. That's one of our happy roles that we play, being the big power.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen on Nord Stream pipeline? First place, it's a mistake. It's a horrible mistake. And many, many people in Germany are saying this right now. But it is part of this industrial complex. They don't have a military industrial complex. They have an export industrial complex. And it's part of this industrial complex, which is going to, in fact, really push hard to have it completed. It's now been completed except for the last 150 kilometers. And so it's going to be very hard to suggest it shouldn't be built.
Well, we'll be.
What I hope, just one last sentence, what I hope that comes out of it is that we negotiate with the Germans and they come up with some conditions on the pipeline which protect the interests of the Poles, the Baltics. Also Finland and Sweden are very upset about it, but especially Ukraine, which is going to lose, if the pipeline is built and if they aren't compensated for it, they're going to lose several $1 billion worth of transit fees every year, which for a country like Ukraine, whose economy isn't the strongest anyway, is a disaster.
Yeah. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on that, and no worry about sarcasm is welcome here. And the senators who might be offended probably aren't watching the Global News Review. Lastly, on Germany, I'm going to have one question for you, but Joy Odell, this is a comment regarding the attitudes of Germans. She hosted two German young men recently, and they were charming. They asked, "Is it true that in the USA you can be poor and work to become wealthy?" And of course, they answered that question
Yes,
for them. But
that's answered yes, yeah.
Just a comment on
Yeah.
American German building bridges across the way. Let
Well,
me.
I'll just say one last thing here, and that is, we shouldn't forget that we dominate their, why Dick can attest to this, we dominate their world. One day last week, when there was some 500 big things going on, the first item on the German morning news, which I always watch in the mornings on television, was the death of one of the founders of the Supremes.
Mm.
And our culture dominates them. Who is the most important person in Germany right now, or in France, or in England? Maybe Joe Biden, American, I mean, but it's also maybe Jeff Bezos, or the head of Facebook, or the head,
Woods.
or Tiger Woods in the moment, or the head of Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's equally interesting that the heads of Google and Microsoft at the moment were born in the same place in India where Kamala Harris's family comes from.
Yeah.
So,
John, let me throw in a question. I'm going to step on Breck's time here, but the Europeans have a totally different view of intellectual property and my data and who it belongs to and all that kind of. Why did that shift or that chasm emerge? That the American view on this is sort of Wild West, whatever you want. Your stuff belongs to Facebook and you can't do anything about it. Whereas the Europeans are really moving in the direction of putting in some kind of individual worker rights, that this stuff belongs to me, not to them, right?
They call it the right to forget too. In other words, they should tell Google, you're supposed to forget our data if we want you to.
Yeah.
Well, this goes back to the wars too in the 20th century, and we shouldn't forget. It shows again that years have passed, but we shouldn't forget that until 1990, 1/3 of Germany was controlled by a communist authoritarian government, which the Secret Service was probably 1/5 of the whole population. So this is a very, very emotional thing for them. It's not just a question of whether you trust Zuckerberg or not. It's a question of their entire sense of human rights that they've developed after World War II, which was preceded by a period where there were absolutely no human rights whatsoever.
Well, I was kind of struck with it. When you start with the Industrial Revolution, basically the workers had no rights at all. The guy who owned the factory called all the shots, and it took a century or more to get into labor unions and equal rights and bargaining chips. And the Germans now are much farther ahead than we in those kinds of worker councils and balancing kinds of
Very
things.
much so.
And the same sort of thing, it seems to me, is with the Facebook, Google space. We have to develop a new way of dealing with these things, and we don't have a plan.
There's no, well, a plan, it would be, if we had a plan, it would be, if we had an idea what the plan was, or if we even had words to describe what should be in the plan.
Yeah.
Again, we're going to get into this later, so I won't say too much, but yeah, that's right. And so, but Dick, the important thing now is to go through leave aside for a minute in industry and trade. They're big things without a question. And as I said, the Germans focus on them a lot. But if you start with Corona, it's very interesting to see if there's one country which managed Corona carefully, it was Germany. If there's one country which wasn't so careful about it, it's the United States. We're not a whole lot worse off right now than they are. And in fact, on the vaccine, we're doing a lot better on the vaccine than they are. And so why do I mention that? Not to make fun of the Germans, but just to say these challenges which are coming up are really, really difficult. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully we will start to understand this, and there will be a little bit of modesty on the part of political leaders that they're not so far ahead as they think they are. But the entire internet regulation issue, which of course is, we know is not just internet, it's more than that, it's global supply chains, it's tremendous networks which transport financial and commercial data, et cetera, et cetera. It's an immense can of worms. Add to that the cyber thing. And the fact that the Russians seem to have decided that their big power status will now be defined by their engineers, which they have lots of good ones, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's mind-blowing what's going to happen. And that's the point I keep trying to make with people, that it's not just going to be a kiss, kiss, hug, hug, and we're back and it's going to be okay. The challenges which are coming are really mind-blowing.
Well, we are going to have to dig much deeper into this. We do have a couple more questions that we'll hold to the Q&A at the end on Germany in particular, but the EU in general. And I know Dr. Breck Walker is just dying to tell us about hippopotami and watermelons and TikTok and social media. So Dr. Breck Walker, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Pat. You're right. I should have had the hippopotami video to post as a lead into mine, but I'll try and be zippy here. So I'm going to talk about social media and a little bit about governmental regulation. And all of us know that social media plays such an outsized influence in our modern societies. And that influence, of course, as has been discussed by everyone, can be beneficial, benign, or malign. And I think, Pat, you've got a slide, it may be up there, but the Facebook today has 2.7 billion subscribers, and YouTube has 2.3 billion, and WhatsApp has 2 billion, and there's Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And just to Ambassador Kornblum's comment on how we dominate Western European society, all but TikTok of those companies are American companies. But social media has a good side, but for every good thing we can say about it, it also has a bad side, kind of an alpha and omega. And that's the problem, that on the one hand, social media can be a terrific source of information and a means to socially interact with one another. But as well, it's a very effective and targeted propaganda medium that is harming everyone's ability to know what's true anymore. The social media does not distinguish between, it's not good at distinguishing between real facts and what Kellyanne Conway might call alternative facts. And, you know, I read these posts today that allege that COVID vaccines cause infertility, or in some sense, these vaccines are a government plot to track those who get vaccinated. And so there's that. In some sense, social media is the ultimate in all things democratic, because it gives all of us, everyone, a voice and a platform. And it has become the go-to means for rallying protest against oppression. I mean, think of the Arab Spring, think of what's gone on in Hong Kong, think of Alexei Navalny in Russia that we've talked about 2 or 3 times over the last couple of months, and all the anti-Putin material that he's putting on YouTube and that has grabbed the attention of a worldwide audience. Social media's importance in this protest sphere is underlined by the fact that increasingly a government's first step in controlling protest is to cut off social media right at that moment to prevent protesting groups from organizing. We've seen that recently in China. We've seen it in Russia. We've seen it in India, and we've seen it in Myanmar. Social media has become a key political communication tool, and all you have to look at is President Trump's use of Twitter, which was integral to getting his message out unfiltered by what he would term a biased mainstream media. He has, somebody counted up the other day, over 34,000 tweets while he was in office that made him a daily presence in our lives, in American lives, unlike any politician, in my mind, who came before him. And then social media threatens to displace conventional news media. I'm not going to get into it unless people want to at the end, but the row between Facebook, the recent row between Facebook and the Australian government is an example of that. And more problematic is how social media slices news sources so thinly, quite thinly, and it provides the opportunity for each of us to get news from only sources that we agree with, from sources that actually cater to me or to you, depending on what our political philosophy is or what our lifestyle is or whatever it may be. And that single source of news, increasingly for each of us, is not a healthy situation for democracy, in my mind, or for good government. So the question becomes, can we keep the good and regulate the bad aspects of social media? Can the adverse side be eliminated or at least controlled through a combination of self-regulation and governmental supervision? Now, that question, of course, raises all sorts of questions about, are we restricting free speech? Are we engaging in censorship here? And so maybe social media is destined to become sort of a Frankenstein, an out-of-control medium that is going to, over time, degrade democratic societies and perhaps even empower authoritarian ones. Now, on the regulation side, in the United States and I think elsewhere, the large social media companies have engaged in some level of self-regulation right from the very beginning in terms of, for example, barring posts that are sexually explicit, that attack someone for their race or gender or sexual orientation, that encourage violence, and so on. But in the last few years, the big platforms, Facebook, et cetera, have begun to try and limit disinformation. They are fact-checking posts, or trying to, and removing those posts found to be false. And I think that Pat also has a slide of just how many posts have been blocked, and it's in the, including spam, it's in the billions over the last, over recent months. I read a couple of days ago that Facebook now has 15,000 people hired to do nothing but fact check. And Facebook, even some, and other platforms, even some instances have gone to banning political ads, which in some sense I can understand because political ads are not typically known for their factfulness. But nevertheless, it's very controversial when that starts to happen. So this has resulted in a firestorm of controversy. You know, one person's opinion is another person's falsehood, and there's issues of free speech versus censorship. Plus, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be consistent in applying standards, because for a time, Twitter and Facebook would allow public personalities, most especially President Trump, but even people like Beyonce, to say some things on Twitter that I couldn't have gotten away with as an ordinary user. So you can see what a can of worms we have here. So this mess has increasingly drawn the attention of governments who are trying to figure out how best to regulate the social media companies. And as you'd expect, the approaches, and I agree with John, that nobody really knows where they want to go yet. And these tentative approaches certainly differ. In the United States, social media companies enjoy very strong liability protection relating to any posts that are made on their platforms. And to date, they are largely self-regulating, although there are growing calls for government regulation, as John mentioned, including by the platform companies like Facebook themselves, because they're faced with such difficult decisions that they feel attacked from all sides almost. In Germany, and John may know more about this than I do, in 2017, I believe, they passed a network enforcement law called NetDG, which among other things requires any internet platform with more than 2 million users, so that means everybody that I mentioned at the very beginning, requires those platforms to put in place a system where potentially illegal content, meaning slander, threats of violence, and so on, to put in place a system where that can be, where users that see it, that can be reported, and if appropriate, deleted in a designated time frame that in some instances is just 24 hours. Right. So, for example, in response to this law, Facebook set up a system where users, German users, can take a screenshot of the offending page, choose one of 20 offenses, illegal offenses that they think the post is allegedly committing, and submit it to Facebook for review. And at least when this first got underway, Facebook was reviewing hundreds of thousands of screenshots every week. This was, if that's what, if Germany wanted people reporting on what they saw as incorrect Facebook post, that system was working. In the early going in Germany, the biggest complainer of that new system appeared to be the far-right Alternative for Germany party that branded the NetDG law as a censorship law. But on the left as well, there were plenty of journalists and internet activists that also complained that censorship was in play here. And then you can go to the other extreme, which is China, the most restrictive censorship laws probably in the world, certainly among major countries. And many Western platforms are banned in China, and their Chinese equivalents are closely monitored by the government. So in my mind, at least, social media in China has turned into a means to spy for the government, the Chinese government, to spy on its population. So Pat, let me close with just 3 quick quotes, one from an author, one from a political consultant, and one from a politician. The first is, quote, "Social media is something of a double-edged sword. At its best, social media offers unprecedented opportunities for marginalized people to speak and bring much needed attention to the issues they face. At its worst, social media also offers everyone an unprecedented opportunity to share in collective outrage without reflection." My second quote is shorter, quote, "Technology and social media have brought power back to the people." And then my third quote from a Pakistani politician is this, quote, "I have said that propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation have always been part of political warfare. However, social media and related platforms have given it a new life and reach through which fake news phenomenon can reach everywhere." And Pat, I'd say to these quotes, yes, yes, and yes. Social media is very much a conundrum of the modern world that in particular democracies need to figure out how to keep the good and limit the bad.
Well, Breck, great presentation. Thanks for sharing all of that. I would only add regarding social media in view of the events this week. If you want to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget, watch what you say on Twitter. And you know, you just might insult a U.S. senator. And Ambassador, we won't. Maybe we'll excise the sarcasm from the videotape of this, so the Senate can't see it, in case you aspire to some confirmable position.
I don't aspire to anything, so it doesn't matter.
Well, we're anybody have any comments or questions for Breck on social media? I know. Dick, you probably burn up the wires every day on Twitter or Instagram. What's your? I see you on Facebook. Where else are you poking around?
Where else am I poke around all sorts of places, but I don't really use too many of these other social media sites. YouTube I use because it has a lot of interesting stuff and a lot of historical context stuff. If you want to see the Red Army's women's chorus, you can, crank them up and feel good about it.
That's your stuff. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Maybe we're approaching too much information there.
Yeah, we didn't need to know that.
Well, we gentlemen, we're running out of runway here, so I propose we hold over the reflection of the Desert Storm ground war. It will be 30 years plus 1 week instead of this afternoon. We do have a couple more questions for Ambassador Kornblum. We have one from Austin Travis, who's a political science major at Lipscomb University. And he asks, how much of Germany's current influence and importance does Ambassador Kornblum think is because of Chancellor Merkel's leadership? Basically, how much will Germany's influence be hurt when she leaves office?
Well, she's played a big role, no question about it. And it's interesting to note maybe that just before she took office, 2003, 2004, when Gerhard Schröder was still chancellor, Germany was called the sick man of Europe. Nobody was talking about German domination of Europe in those years because why? Because the German economy was still struggling with the incorporation of East Germany, which began in 1990. So in the early 2000s, it was about 10 years. But they put it all together and they've had an unbelievable run since then. And now they are where they will always be anyway. My answer to Travis's question will be, it depends a lot, but the fact is that Germany is such a potential in Europe. It's the biggest country by far. It's the richest country by far. It's the most dynamic country by far. And it's also sitting right in the center of continent where everybody has a border with Germany. And so it's always going to be the main country in Europe. The question is, how and under what circumstances.
We have a question from Charlie Kim, who says he works for the U.S. Department of State as an FSP specialist in international security and case methods. He asks, he says that China has been developing its own digital currency, and Russia and other nations of wealth in oil are developing the petrodollars. So are Europeans depending more on euro dollars or seeking another currency other than the US dollar because of its quick devaluation as the US continues, quote, printing dollars?
Well, that's one of the biggest questions that is around at the moment. If I had a good answer for that, I'd go out and probably earn a lot of those petrodollars. Conventional wisdom is that the United States is so firmly lodged as the center, not only of economy, politics, military, but also of the world's financial system, that the United States could make lots of mistakes and the dollar is going to continue to dominate. Other people believe that our role will fade away as China becomes stronger, and that the Chinese currency or some digital currency, some Bitcoin kind of currency, will ultimately take over. I haven't the slightest idea, to tell you the truth, but what I do have is experience, and I have lived through at least 4 or 5 cases where people said the dollar was finished, and it was far from finished.
Yeah,
we have simply got ourselves into such a strong position that it's going to be very hard to replace the dollar. The entire credit card system is based on dollars. The entire airline systems are based on dollars.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the entire world economy is based on dollars. And breaking that monopoly is going to be very hard. I'm not arguing it one way or the other, but I'm just saying that the advantages the United States has are so great that it's going to be very hard for them to be overcome.
Yeah, various oil crises in the West gave rise to the notion that the petrodollars was going to drive a new basket of currencies.
Right. Never happened.
Let me close with a question, unless Dick and Breck have something more to ask while you're here as our special guest on transatlantic issues. Tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about the Iranian nuclear deal, and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met virtually with the EU 3 nations to talk about the Iran deal. What can you share with us in terms of the perspective from the Europeans looking at the United States and Iran dancing on getting back into this deal? Do they see this as something they need to get engaged with, or just wait for Iran and the U.S. to figure it out, or how would they approach it?
No, they've been actively engaged already. They've been talking with the Iranians. I mean, the Europeans want us very much to get back into it because the agreement only has real validity if the United States is part of it. President Biden wants to get into it, and the Iranians have at least given, halfway positive or halfway not negative, at least reactions to it. I think in the end, the question is going to be, can we find some kind of face-saving device for the Iranians so that they're just not giving up and saying, okay, Trump was right, that we're coming back anyway. And right. Most people believe that can be found through lessening the sanctions that the Trump administration put on the Iranians. I don't have the slightest idea whether that's a viable thing politically in this country or whether it would be enough for the Iranians. But there has to be some, this is what I read anyway, I'm just telling you what one hears from people, is there has to be some kind of gesture in their direction, because they seem to be, have carried out the agreement correctly, except the parts which they've gone back on, but they have not violated the agreement. They weren't the ones who tried to abrogate it. So there's a certain pressure on the United States to do something to kick this back into action again. The question is, what is that something? And is there something that Biden could sell politically in the United States? And
well, we'll have a robust conversation about the obstacles ahead and what the Biden administration needs to do to get to a deal. Yes,
one
sir.
last question for John.
Ambassador Bowers, you have the floor.
Did you ever get your Stasi file?
No, and I never will because I don't want to see it.
Well, I got mine and it had a lot of stuff in from the Polish service and the Czech service.
Right.
And it had some stuff in there that just totally fabricated. It had nothing to do, it wasn't true.
Well, I was talking on a insecure line between Berlin and the West
Yeah.
for a total of probably 15 years. And I assumed that every single conversation I had was recorded.
You're correct.
And I can't remember how many of them were the 20th century version of a bad tweet. And so I just decided I didn't want to see it because if there's anybody in the entire U.S. system who was deeply involved with these people for the long period, I was involved with them starting in the late 60s already.
Yeah.
So I just figured, why should I want to see all this?
Okay.
I had a friend who was there at the office and who gave me a few little tidbits out of it, and they were all wrong.
Yeah.
So that
sounds like something that an intrepid journalist could get a hold of and write very.
Maybe I think that's private. I don't think that
Especially if your name is Steele, you can get these kinds of things.
Yeah, or Snowden is. But no, we were just talking about privacy regulations. Germany has very strict privacy regulations on these things also. And it's very hard. There have been investigations over the years, and some of them were successful to ban people from political life because they were Stasi agents. But to get that information out, you have to it's really hard. And so,
well, we certainly live in an interesting world. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to spend some time this afternoon. Ambassador Kornblum, thank you so
very
much
much for the invitation.
For
Good to
joining
see you,
us
John.
again.
Thank you.
Ambassador
Thank
Bowers,
you.
Dr. Breck Walker, thank you. And we will resurface the Gulf War next week. We have that to look forward to, plus a couple of other topics from the news of the week as we drill down on what's going on in the world. Just a reminder for those of you who are not members of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, please go to tnwac.join and look at the list of benefits and consider joining. That's the best way for you to support the global affairs awareness programs of the council. And we do a lot more than global news reviews and other community outreach webinars. We're heavily invested in working with students in our community to help them understand more of what's going on in the world. So thank you for joining us today. Please join the World Affairs Council. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for your time and your
Thank
expertise.
you very much.
Good to see everybody.
And your interesting stories. Breck, enjoy Florida. You can peel back the curtain now. And we will see you all next week. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.